Hi everyone, thank you for joining me here on Miniature Monthly. I'm Matt DiPietro, and today we're going to be continuing our journey painting this Sanguinius diorama, really beautiful figure here. So this is part 2 of that series. So if you haven't seen part 1, you might want to go back and check that out, where we handle the painting of this lava in the base down here. In the meantime, not covered in the video series is the painting of this demon. I decided to just kind of get that finished because I was in a hurry to show you guys how to paint some non-metallic metals. So we're going to be working on Sanguinius' armor here, which will be painted in a gold non-metallic metal. This model is still in some pieces, so to kind of simplify things, since we're just going to be painting the armor, let's kind of disassemble him. Got the wings. We won't be painting on the spear this time, but maybe in a future video. And I think for now we're just going to remove his head as well. Alright, so we're going to be painting in non-metallic metals this time. Usually I like to paint in metallics, but I wanted to give myself a challenge and see how we could do some non-metallic metals. This model is going to really lend itself very well to it because it has 2 different light sources. So all of the angles of the armor should have one of these 2 light sources really strong on it. So it'll be this really dynamic effect, and since the ground is really dark as well, that should create a nice dark separation line between the 2 light sources. So just to be clear, the 2 light sources that I'm talking about are, one, the sun, which will be very strong coming from above. You know, it's very bright. And we've already indicated this with 2 tones of primer. In this case I did gray and white. So no black was used in it, and that's really going to make Sanguinius kind of pop out in comparison to some of the other areas, like the base. So, the second light source is the lava on the base, and that should be providing light kind of coming from below, and these 2 light sources will kind of balance each other out. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the sun is such a strong light source that if at any point the 2 light sources are shining together on a surface, the weaker light source will just lose, and you will kind of like lose that light. So if the sun and the lava are shining on one of the planes of his armor, you'll really only see the sun shining there. So what in practical terms that means is that the lava light source will really only show up in the areas of shadow on our non-metallic metals. Okay, well, with all that sort of prep to talk about, let's move on to talking about our colors here. So let's take a look at our palette. Now, to start with, I have some what I like to call modification colors here. These are going to be colors that are being reflected from the environment on the non-metallic metals. So we have some orange here, which will be the lava, and then we have some crimson, because some of the surfaces are really close to the demon. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to work in that crimson tone in those areas to kind of suggest that it's reflecting the demon. And then we have a little bit of Payne's gray there, and that will kind of be for when the armor is really close to some of the rock elements on the base, which are really dark blue. I'm just going to flip the palette around so you can get a better look at the colors that I'm going to be using for the non-metallic metals. Alright, so just want to list out the paints that I'm using here. We have some carbon black and titanium white up at the top of the palette, which we'll be mixing in to kind of change the value level of our colors. And then up here we have some raw sienna, some yellow oxide from Chimera colors. Down here, this yellow is a cold yellow, also from Chimera colors. I have a greenish yellow and a raw umber. So those will kind of represent the colors that I will be using in the highlight areas, the areas that are facing the sky and the sun. Now you might notice I'm using some cold colors there. That's kind of to suggest, that's like the green and the cold yellow. That's to suggest maybe the blue of the sky canceling out some of that yellow of the metallic, because it's a gold metallic. So surfaces that are facing a blue sky with a gold metallic might appear sort of greenish, or just have a greenish tinge. You still want them to, look kind of more on the yellow side. And this raw umber that we have here is kind of a bit greenish as well. And then the colors we have here to represent some of the deeper, sort of warmer browns that are going to show up in our shadows, and the areas that are facing the glow of the lava. This is a burnt umber, and we have a bit of Mars violet. Down here we have some shadow colors, which will just be areas that are not facing either light source, should have a dark, very, very dark color in those areas. So we have, this is a raw umber dark, sepia, and a little bit of the Payne's gray. And these are from Holbein and Golden heavy body acrylics, as well as the Chimera colors. Non-metallic metals is just painting a reflective object. So objects that are reflective have some unique aspects to them that are different than non-reflective objects. The biggest thing is what we might call specularity, which means that in general, the highlights are brighter value than the highlights in a non-reflective object when they're placed in the same lighting situation. So when you place a reflective object and a non-reflective object next to each other in the same lighting situation, the highlights will appear brighter on the reflective object. And the same thing, the opposite is also true for the shadows. The shadows will appear deeper and darker in value on the reflective object than the non-reflective object. The second aspect of specularity that you'll notice is that the transition from light to dark areas is far more abrupt on a reflective object than a non-reflective object. So we just kind of have to push our shadows really, really dark and our highlights really, really bright, close to white. Usually your final highlights, little pinpricks of light on a reflective object, will go all the way to white. And often your shadows go all the way down to a very deep, sometimes black, or very near to black color. Okay. So, with that in mind, let's just try to demonstrate that aspect. First, though, we'll kind of mix up some of our color. So, I'm going to make a continuum of color just to kind of show what we're doing here. We can pull some of this white down into the top of my continuum. This is where my highlights are going to live. And we'll just pull some of these paints over. The nice thing about the wet palette is you can have this continuum of color on your wet palette and kind of pull from different parts of it. And this allows the colors to kind of modulate. Now, where these are all highlight colors, now when it starts to get into the shadows, a lot of times the deepest shadows actually occur along what's called the terminator. So this is actually where the area of light terminates, where the light is stopping. and we can put our deepest shadow here. Now, areas of shadow on a reflective object oftentimes begin to reflect the environment around them. So a lot of times they'll get brighter, and there'll be a second sort of light source. Even if there isn't another source of light, light is bouncing off of objects, and it will act as a light source on a reflective object. I might even take a little bit of the white to brighten that. Now I'm just going to kind of blend these together a little bit by running my brush back and forth through the continuum. If you start to get those streaks, that kind of means that paint is built up in the brush, and we kind of just need to wash the brush off here. And make sure it's dry as well, because we don't want to add a lot of water to this continuum. Okay, we can kind of continue to brush now. Maybe just pick up where we left off. If you want to make it even smoother, you can kind of go back through. It's like wet blending on your wet palette. Alright. So that'll be handy, and we can, continue to kind of pull from some of the pure color as well. All right. Now the last thing I want to do before we get started is I kind of want to block out some areas where there's going to be reflections. In this case, the areas where the lava is going to show up really strongly. So down here, you can see this whole plane has some orange on it. This is just to kind of remind me of where these, where that lava glow is going to be. But it'll be really helpful later on. And the other thing that will allow me to do is remove the model from from the display base, and that way you'll be able to get a better look at the painting. So yeah, maybe some of this glow is shining up on this area. Let's put a little bit of that orange ink in that area. Remember, these lights don't go around corners, so just keep them very well defined. And these planar sort of objects, we want to make sure that the light isn't going onto the... it only appears on one plane of the object. Alright. Now I know I'm going to probably find some places that I missed later on, so I just got to be aware of that. Like this guy here. Let's get him before I forget. Now we don't want that orange to go all the way to the inside of his knee, because it's constricted there. The leg would block that light from hitting there. See, non-metallic metals isn't a set of rules. It's more complicated than that. We want to know where our light source is and paint that onto the model using those rules of specularity. Okay. Now that we have that orange sort of marked out there, maybe I'm going to mark out where the leg is close to the demon, so we can put a little bit of that red, like crimson, in there. This is alizarin crimson that I'm using. We're going to give it, it's already pretty transparent, but we're going to give it a bit of water, because we're just kind of marking out these planes here. They're really close to the demon. And it should reflect some portion of that color. We can maybe put a little crimson in here too. That will look nice. Now that effect of it picking up the color will fade away pretty quickly with distance, so we just want to be really sparing with it. Don't go overboard. Sometimes less is more with these effects. Alright. Kind of tinted those areas. And I think that we can remove him from the display base now and put him on a more easily manageable handle. So we're just gonna do that. Okay, now you can see we're back with him, and we are we can see where those reflections will show up. Now let's you can start in a few different ways. Some people like to start with adding highlights first. But I like to kind of work around where the terminator occurs on the figure, which is kind of where the highlights end and the shadows begin. And those areas we use some of our darkest colors and kind of separate the model into two halves. So maybe this shoulder pad's a good place to start. I'm just using some of this dark color here in the middle. I might even, let's just start with that. And we can kind of see where it's separated in two halves. This half over here should all be in shadow. So we should get some of this paint, but really we want to kind of blend it a little bit. Now remember, we can always come back and add some more nuance to this area, but we're just kind of marking this out and marking where the terminator occurs. That's like the terminating line where the light is no longer hitting those surfaces. They should also all be significantly darker. With a non-reflective object, it kind of diffuses the light more, so you don't get these really stark transitions of shadow. Now this is just going to be delineating where the shadow areas begin, but we're going to make these shadows even darker here with our next step. And you shouldn't try to blend too much. You shouldn't try to make the transition a blended transition. I mean, in some lighting situations it might be like that, but in this situation, an outdoor situation, it should happen fairly abruptly. So on this sort of surface, it's going to happen, bam, very quickly. I'm not blending that transition between this light area and dark area at all. In fact, it can be a little jagged, and this might be representing sort of the jaggedness of objects that it's reflecting. These really deep areas on the model can be really dark. All this stuff down here, it's facing the ground. It's all on the shadow side. None of the sunlight's hitting it. So we're just going to give it this shadow, a bit of a glaze of this shadow color, especially starting along the transition line between the faces. Between the various angles, this is kind of an angular shape. I'm definitely going to work on this stuff more. This is just kind of giving us a hint. The great thing is that you don't really have to blend, because the transitions on metallic objects happen more abruptly, so there's less blending than it would be on a non-reflective object. I'm going to use some of these really sort of reddish browns also down here. I think we should use more reddish browns as we get closer to the ground in the shadows, because maybe it's reflecting a little bit of that lava color. Now this area here on the inside of his leg that is getting a lot more of that orange, we're going to use more of these reddish browns in those areas rather than using this sort of transition brown. So I'm just going to go straight in with the Mars Violet and see what we get. Yeah. And then we'll also use this burnt umber as well. In some ways, we're just kind of capturing the tonality of the metal colors. Now here, on the far back of his leg, hopefully you can see that, it's facing directly towards this rock. So what that means is that we're going to use a very dark, sort of bluish color in that area. So what that means is that we're going to use kind of a dark, really dark color in that area because it's very close to a rock that's very dark. So we're just going to put in a strong band of this really dark color, like that. I'm going to use some of this dark brown to kind of maybe blend that in. There we go. Right, let's do this guy in the foreground here. Again, this is just the shadow color. Just kind of sticking with that shadow color for now. These areas, well, I made a mistake. Yeah, this is more of in the highlight area. But here, where it's overhanging, will be in the shadow. Yeah, and we're really just kind of trying to show where one part starts and the other ends, making that fairly dark. The separating line between the light and the shadow. There we go. And a lot of times it's that aspect of having that really dark color right next to, you know, a really light area that occurs when there's angles that gives that non-metallic look. Sometimes people fixate too much on that, and you should fixate on the direction of the light and how intense that light is, how close it is, these sorts of things, and try to paint that onto the figure rather than following like a set of rules to make the non-metallic metals. Yeah, I'm going to try to see if we can get a good shot on that area too. Yeah, hopefully you can see that NMM effect starting to take shape. Yeah, the overhanging areas are probably going to be in shadow as well. So let's get some shadow color on there. This should be shadows back in here. Remember, we want the separating line to be dark. This has a little extra darkness there. Yeah, there we go. This deep area here doesn't have any glow in it, and it should be really dark. Now what we might end up doing later is adding a little highlight down in those deep shadows, because it might be reflecting this part of the cape that's really close to it. Especially if that cape has a light color on it, like white or cream. Sorry if you can hear that lawnmower in the background. It sounds like my neighbor is doing a little bit of lawn mowing here. Normally I film sort of at night so we can avoid these sorts of noise distractions, but this is one of the last chances I'll get to film before I get to Gen Con, so that's why we're kind of filming during the day here, so hopefully you can forgive that, and hopefully I get to see some of you all at Gen Con. I always enjoy meeting up with our patrons and getting to chat and see how their painting's doing. So with these really planar objects, we really want to make sure that if the plane is not facing towards the light, that we make it that dark color. Like that. Yeah, so like this area here. So now that we're getting up higher on the model, it's more likely that we're going to be getting that sort of light source coming in, but there's still some areas here that we want to make sure that we get to, because they really are constricted from the light source, and if we can make that really obvious, it will look more non-metallic. Because on a non-reflective surface, this would just like shade down to a shadow, but on a reflective surface, that transition happens really abruptly. And that line, that transition line is really distinct on the reflective surface. Now, his head is here. It will be blocking the light too. So I'm just going to put just a placeholder shadow here to remind me that there's a head. There we go. We'll probably have some de-shadow down in here. Down in here. There we go. Even an object like this plate might cast a shadow there, so just be aware of that. Depending on how you feel about it, you might want to, even though these aren't metallic objects, I might just kind of darken it back in here. Yeah, give it some black. That'll just help my eye read it a little bit easier. We're almost done with these, just this first part here. Yeah, I have a feeling that these areas are also going to be kind of orange tinted. Just missed that before, so let's kind of get that in there. Just kind of gotta be brave and make that transition line is really dark. See those angles? Now this is a concave surface, so this area is going to be reflecting the sky. Yeah, I'm really liking how that's starting to look. Let's see, we missed some of these armor plates in the back here. Now this is actually going to be receiving a shadow of the wings, so maybe not make this as warm. Maybe we make this a little bit more mixed with the Payne's gray. Yeah. There's like a wing that passes in front of this. Right, and we want to get the back of his leg too, kind of same sort of deal. Maybe even darker because it's reflecting this rock here. Let's see, it can go up to this bright. This is getting even brighter here because it's facing the sky. So that really abrupt shift from very dark to very light can happen in certain situations, and really looks really nice. Very non-metallic looking. Yeah, just a few more areas of that. Right up in here. It's really surprising how important this really dark color is. You see how there's this light in the middle here? That's the lava. We're going to make that really orange and look nice. Yeah, there we go. All right. Yeah. So now I just want to maybe add some of those colors, some of those sort of greenish yellows and stuff like that into the highlight area, just to give us some basic color to work from. I'm just going to start with that greenish yellow area here. I also have some white mixed in, I can tell. I'm going to make this very watered down, and just going to give us some basic color in the highlight areas. You can use various tones, maybe modulate it so it's lighter and less green as it gets higher up towards the face. Or you can just do one basic tone over the whole highlight area if you wanted to keep it simple. Really anywhere that's still white you should consider as a possibility for a highlight area. I mean, maybe you just made a mistake, or you know, like this down in here should probably be shadowed and maybe shouldn't be totally highlighted. But we can continue to work on that sort of thing as we continue to paint. And kind of leaving a little bit of that white still showing can sometimes be a good thing too. Now keep these sort of cool yellows completely out of the shadow areas. That way the areas that are facing the sky are completely separated from the areas that are facing the ground. Anytime you're in doubt, just ask yourself that question. Is it facing the sky or is it facing the ground? I think especially in the breastplate area, I'm going to kind of modulate things a bit warmer. And we can kind of work a little bit of those warm tones in more sparingly in other areas. So I might take up a little bit of that warm tone, which I think this is that raw sienna, a bit warmer than the greenish yellow. Coming back with the greenish yellow now. These areas that are kind of only partially facing the sky might get more of the green. In fact, we'll probably end up darkening that in later on. Yeah, so this area of this cylinder is facing towards the sky, and we're just going to give it that yellow. Just a little bit of glaze. You'd be surprised how just delineating that transition correctly gives us the start of the effect. I mean, just imagine how hard this would be if you were painting one little area at a time instead of rather the whole thing at once. I think that's a really good thing to point out, because a lot of times I see people painting non-metallic metals in one area at a time, and what you might end up doing if you do that way, a common mistake is to have those areas each individually they'll look non-metallic metal because they're painted specularly with those really deep shadows, really high highlights, but they're kind of also nonsensical where you can't really tell where the light's coming from because the pieces of the puzzle don't fit together correctly. So kind of painting things gradually like we're doing here is a good way to avoid that happening. Put a little shadow in there too. Now here we're using that raw umber. It's kind of like this darkest of the greenish yellows, because these are partially facing the sky, but also kind of constricted by the plates and the area around it. And I think I'll just kind of make a pass with that raw umber and sort of work it in those areas that I described. Those areas that are kind of only partially facing the sky, but kind of constricted by the rest of the model. Yeah, so like areas down in here. And, this area in here. It's kind of a medium tone that we're using for that. We can kind of also use it to just kind of give us some basic sort of line work on the detail areas. Don't have to worry about making this too heavy because we still haven't added highlights on, and we can use those highlights to kind of give us those sharp edges and stuff like that that we might be losing from getting that basic shading in there. Still a lot of work to do, but I'm liking the progress so far. Hopefully you all at home are liking how this is looking too. And maybe you're feeling like, hey, that non-metallic metals, maybe I can give that a try. And that's a great place to be, It takes practice and understanding of the light source to really make it look real. But the more we work within those spheres and that way of thinking, trying to think about the light, the easier and easier it gets, and it becomes very, very fun after a while. You're just going to have this breakthrough where the painting becomes fun again, and that's where it can feel really great, very very powerful moment. So I think those moments of breakthrough is kind of what we live for with our painting sometimes. And yeah, if I can help you get to one of those breakthroughs, then that's really rewarding for me as well. So yeah, if you have an experience like that, you should share it with everybody on the Miniature Monthly page. Maybe share some kind of your breakthrough models. That's also a good reason to, take pictures of your own models or just keep them around and don't strip them, because then you have a record of, where you've been and you can see your progress. Really handy. Maybe if I'll get around to posting some of my first paint jobs up online sometime, and you guys can see that really everybody kind of starts in the same place with their painting, and it just depends on how much mindfulness we give and the kind of teachers that we have along the way to take us to those next levels, and also a lot of hard work, a lot of practice, but it's definitely worth it, and it's fun too. I mean, if art wasn't fun and rewarding, I don't think we'd have so many people enjoying this great hobby that we're part of, So, yeah. It's looking really good with that basic color. I mean, I like it. Hopefully you like it too. I think there's just a few more places that need that sort of basic color in our light areas. The areas that are facing the sky. So we'll just wrap those up, and then we can move on to the next stage. Because we gotta get the back here too. So let's get some of that basic color on there. Yeah. I'm just glazing that color on there. We've already established where that light starts and where it ends, so we're just gonna put that down there to just give it that color. Yeah, these areas here are facing the sky too, so we'll give them a little bit of that color, and then we'll start to really make sense. The areas that are facing the sky at this point are really fairly clearly delineated as white. We don't want that yellow. I mean, be controlled with it. Don't let it spill into the shadow areas at all. Just paint it where there's that white showing like this. And it's interesting because the next step we're going to come back with some white paint and add additional highlights. It's kind of like we're covering up the white with some general color, and then we're coming back with white and putting it back in. Nice. I think we're already kind of getting some of that effect in there. I just kind of like that. Maybe there's just a few areas. Well, if I miss anything, we can always come. Yeah, I had a feeling I was missing something in this collar up here. Yeah, let's get the color in there on that collar. Don't want to miss that. In the middle here. There we go. Oh yeah, and this face up here, we don't want to forget that. This parallel here. Yeah. Every little point counts. Yeah. All right. Now, remember when I said that the highlights go all the way up to white? Now here's our little bravery test here. We're going to take pure titanium white, mix it with just a tiny bit of the raw sienna. Still look white. And the only reason we're mixing it with that tiny bit of raw sienna is we want to save the pure titanium white as like kind of a magic bullet at the end. If we go straight to the titanium white, there's nowhere to go to add additional highlights. So using this, we're trying to find where the highest point is, where that's the point of on each face that's pointing towards the sun, and we're creating these really sharp bars of light like this. Boom. You know, the sun's right here. Put that bar of light in there, and then run some edge highlights along the edge that's facing more towards the sun. So here it's going to be really, really good. Just like that. Remember to pull those lines down along the edges of objects. Use the side of your brush to really catch the edges. Now we make sure that that line continues down. If we were to put it there and leave it off of this area, we'd be in big trouble. So we want to make sure that they match up. Run it along the peak of wherever that object is. There we go. We can come over here and really hit this spot hard. If we accidentally get some into the shadows or the crevices, don't worry about it. We can fix that later. be sparing with it. Don't go overboard. Make sure that it's really like the surface that's facing the sun the most. Don't just outline everything with the edges. Only have the edge that is facing the sun be outlined. Now some of what we were doing kind of starts to make more sense, I think. Those highlights going really, really high up, it's so key to making those it look non-metallic. Or making it look metallic. Using a non-metallic paint, rather. When people have been painting what we call non-metallic metals now has been done for many centuries. Some of the best paintings of the non-metallic metals that I've seen are in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It's really amazing studies in still life of things like tankards and metal objects. We can learn a lot from studying those paintings and trying to put that into 3 dimensions in our own paintings. Those guys were masters of their craft, and we can be inspired by them, even though we're doing something very different. Awesome. Well, I think that's looking pretty legit. There's still a lot to do in refining what we have here, but I like what we have. And I think we can switch back to maybe playing around more with some of the shadow areas that bear the reflections of the environment. This is kind of, remember, reflecting the demon here. I'm just kind of deepening and darkening this, adding a little bit more of that color. I might add a little bit more of that orange color in here. Remember, I had just a little bit of it up here. I forgot to add some highlights to this back of his leg here, so let's do that. Yeah, I think that really adds a lot. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little video about doing the non-metallic metals and getting us started here. In our next video, I think we're just going to start from here and continue onwards and refine what we have already, and then also talk about doing some non-metallic metal on silver, the silvery steel of his spear. So hopefully you'll continue on as patrons and check out that video next month. We really appreciate all the support that you give us here at Miniature Monthly, and hopefully we can give that support right back to you in the form of advice and coaching. And hopefully I get to see some of you at Gen Con this coming week. It's always good to see my patrons there and get to meet up. Also say hi to Aaron and Elizabeth there at Gen Con as well. Well, until next time, you all enjoy your painting and paint bravely.